This is the Royal Air Force Church in London. It's a beautifully proportioned, thin church designed to sit on a traffic island in the middle of London traffic with a wonderful, tall, really quite thin spire stepped up in various stages. Before I started to draw this, I did spend 3 or 4 minutes doing a quick sketch just to get a sense of proportions and what parts might cause me a little bit of trouble, and also just to start warming up my hand. I'll show it to you at the end if you're interested how that looked, and I'll tell you what advantage it gave me when I actually began this drawing. But I start with this center section because I think it's going to be the easiest one to get in proportions because of all the trees and the fences and the other things at ground level. I think that's probably going to be the most complicated part of the church to draw. So I start with this section, this upper ground level section, which we can see more clearly, and I work at getting the proportions correct across the face so I get the width, and then I can use that to go upwards with the spire. Personally, I feel the spire is the key part of this church visually. So I want to try and capture the fairly light, delicate nature of it. It is a very elegant structure, I think. The challenge will also be to keep it nice and straight, because the thinner something is, such as this, the harder it is to keep it not looking like it's on a bit of a lean. So I'm just working out the proportions there of the rest of the elements on the front. I'm using a 0.3mm pen. At the end, I do switch to a 0.2 just to do some of the elements to either side which sit further back, and that was to help the church itself stand forward a little bit. So I just put in that balustrade, a little bit of emphasis on the pediment to indicate the shadow there, and now I start moving up with the spire. This is the interesting part to draw, I guess, for me. I think drawing this type of building is possibly my sweet spot for freehand architectural drawing. I really did enjoy doing this. So constantly I'm aligning what I'm drawing now with what I've drawn underneath, and I'm also doing my best to align the center elements. We're not quite seeing this church straight on. We actually see a little more of the right hand side than we do at the left hand side, and we can see this when we look at the cornices at the base of each section, how on the left hand side it flicks back behind what we can see, but on the right hand side it comes down some distance down the side of the church. And it's important to try and capture that, because it does help create this slightly three-dimensional sense that we're not just looking straight on, but we do have a very ever so slight side view of the church. So continuing to go up, I'm trying to draw this roughly actual size because that would fit well for the paper, and just makes it a little bit more straightforward because we can eyeball from reference to paper and get a sense of how we're going. So here's this nice tall section here. And as it gets taller, we're looking up at it more than looking along at it. And so the scallop shaping on the corners becomes more of a rounded effect as we look up. And again, this is where careful observation is important. The lines that are relatively straight lower down start to curve more as we get higher, and the angle of viewing them change. Now we have the very top. I'm trying to use very light lines here, particularly compared to the lines I've used in the rest of the church, because I do want this spire to have a sense of being lighter and elegant, and I want the lower part of the church to have a sense of being sturdier and a foundation in some ways to hold the spire up. So now I have the tricky part of working out the lower part of the church. There is a rounded porch area that has a decorative urn of some type sitting on it. So I couldn't put this window in, or I couldn't do the shading of the window until I'd located that urn, and I couldn't locate the urn until I'd put the rounded roof section that it sits on in place. So having done that now, I need to start tentatively working out where these trees are. I find these sorts of trees early in spring, when they're half in bud, half in leaf or flower, are actually the hardest to draw, because we see a lot through them, and yet the tree is overwhelmingly still what we see and is the major focus, and it is just a glimpse of what's behind. And then we also have these railings as well. So I positioned the front gates to help me get the railings in place. I positioned the gates by aligning them in the reference first with the facade of the church, and then I locate that spot on my drawing. And so once I've got the gate posts in place, it's easier then to locate where the railings are going to be. I do the actual gates first, and then we've also got the steps of the church behind, and now I locate the railing. Notice how the rails get very close together to the point almost of being just a black mass. Further away we slope along that left hand side, and the same thing happens on the right hand side. With foreshortening, the space between the rails gets closer and closer until finally all we can see is lots of rails lined up hard against each other. And so again, capturing that effect is important if we want our fence to look like it's moving away from us, because intuitively we know that's how it's going to look. So if we don't draw it, it just won't look quite right. You'll notice how I do the darker shadows behind the rails. I don't just do that hatching over the rails, I actually do it between the rails to give a sense of some sort of reflected light on the actual railings themselves. And I'm really just feeling my way with this as I go. There are a couple of parts where the ground level facade comes through, particularly this arch window on the extreme right of the ground floor. So I try and give a hard edge to that, so it does have a sense of we're looking not at a shadow of the tree, but at the actual building coming through. Now I've switched to the 0.2mm pen now. There's a spire of a church down the road, and there's a tree just to the left, a winter tree that obviously takes a little longer to come into its spring life than the ones in front. So I do that, and then I also decide to do the building to the left because I think it will just give our church a bit of context. I don't want to draw what's on the right because there's just a lot of trucks and cars and things, but I think the church was looking a bit lonely, particularly for a church that's surrounded by a road on both sides. So I just position these windows, and I really do want to keep this very light and gestural as I draw. So just positioning these windows. The most important thing about these windows is that they do line up above each other. I think it's better to have a couple of little guidelines just to help do that. That's going to be far less obvious than windows that are a bit wonky and don't actually line up. And just notice what I do behind the tree here. Again, different artists have different styles, but I still want the closest object to feel closest, and therefore I do have to still draw the windows behind, and I keep it very gestural, and whether you think it works or not is up to you. And I lastly just add the ground level of the front here. Before I started drawing this, I took my advice and did a quick little rough out of a part of it just to get both a little bit warmed up with line work, but also to start to get a sense of proportions and perhaps something that may cause me grief. This was my little rough warm-up sketch, and the thing that I did in it is that I put this too high, and I realized it was too high when I began to come in with the level of the balustrade, and then I also didn't make this section tall enough. So while I didn't progress this very far, it did help me to sort out a couple of points that might have caused me some problems when I was drawing. I spent maybe 4 minutes on this. It's a great little investment to a better result when we actually commit more time. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. I hope you found this interesting. Why not print off a copy? The reference photo is on my channel community page, so print off a copy and have a go of drawing the Royal Air Force Church in London. But look, whatever you're drawing and however you're drawing it, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.